She almost chose not to step into that car. At 77, Amanda believed life had already revealed all its surprises. She had buried a husband, retired from the classroom, folded her days into small, dependable rituals. Nothing startled her anymore. Nothing rearranged her heart. Or so she thought. But it only takes one delayed flight, one nearly empty curb, one stranger who says your name like it matters. What began as a routine ride home would later feel like something else entirely. Less coincidence, more quiet destiny pressing a fingertip against the glass. If stories about unexpected connections move you, consider subscribing, leaving a like, and telling us in the comments which city you're listening from. Your presence here means more than you know. Now, let's begin. Wait, the airport had fallen into that peculiar midnight hush by the time Amanda stepped outside. The sliding doors whispered closed behind her, trapping the sterile glow of fluorescent lights inside. Ahead stretched the wide Texas sky, dark, immense, forgiving. It was nearly midnight in Dallas. The oppressive heat of the day had softened into a warm breeze that brushed her cheeks, carrying faint traces of jet fuel and something like distant rain. She didn't travel much anymore. At 77, she preferred the comfort of repetition. The kitchen window framing the crepe myrtle tree, the morning crossword folded precisely in half, the dependable afternoon calls with her sister in Arizona. Life had become manageable, predictable, safe. Her granddaughter's graduation in Chicago had been the exception. You have to come, Grandma, the girl had said. And Amanda, who had learned the fragility of time, couldn't refuse. The ceremony had been perfect. The return flight had not. 3 hours delayed, 3 hours of stiff chairs and polite announcements. By the time her suitcase rattled across the curbside pavement, the pickup lanes were nearly deserted. Her son had offered to meet her. It's too late, she'd insisted. I'll manage. Manage. She had clung to that word 8 years earlier, when Thomas died, when casseroles stopped arriving and sympathy cards thinned out. I will manage, she had told herself then, and she had. Now, beneath a street lamp's pale glow, she tightened her cardigan and opened the rideshare app on her phone. The screen blurred unless she tilted it just right. Her eyes weren't what they used to be. A driver accepted the ride. Kenneth, 5 minutes away. The name struck her as steady, solid. She pictured someone in his 40s, maybe early 50s. A practical man, efficient, polite. A dark sedan glided to the curb with quiet precision. Headlights dimmed, the passenger window lowered. Amanda? The voice was warm, low, unhurried. There is something disarming about hearing your name spoken gently by a stranger. It creates the illusion of familiarity, of recognition. That's me, she answered. He stepped out to lift her suitcase. The gesture surprised her. Few people did that anymore. Up close, he was older than she'd imagined. Mid-60s, perhaps, silver at his temples. Tall, though his shoulders curved slightly forward, like someone accustomed to carrying invisible weight. His gray eyes held a kind of patient attentiveness. When he smiled, it wasn't rushed. Long night? He asked, placing her suitcase carefully in the trunk. You could say that, she replied, hearing the weariness beneath her composure. He opened the passenger door for her. She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, not out of fear, out of awareness. A life is shaped by such small decisions. Then she slid into the seat. The leather was cool. The interior carried a faint scent. Cedar, maybe. Clean. Grounded. As the car pulled away from the curb, the city lights stretched ahead like scattered jewels against velvet darkness. For a few minutes they rode in silence. Not the strained kind. The other kind. The kind that feels like the pause before something begins. We rode on, almost as if we were listening to the quiet breathe. I hope you don't mind, he said at last, his voice low and steady. But I prefer driving without the radio this late. Helps me focus. I don't mind at all, Amanda replied. Silence can be good company. He glanced at her briefly, the corner of his mouth lifting in a restrained smile. Outside, the highway unspooled before them, wide, nearly empty. Streetlights passed in measured intervals, casting soft bands of gold across the dashboard. Amanda found herself watching the light move over Kenneth's hands on the wheel. They were steady hands, intentional, the hands of a man who had built things and perhaps lost them. "Were you visiting family?" he asked. "Yes, my granddaughter just graduated from college." "Well now," he said gently, "that's something to be proud of." "It is," she answered, a quiet warmth rising in her chest. "But it makes you realize how quickly time slips past. No one really warns you about that?" He exhaled softly. "That's the truth. One minute you're planning for the future, and the next you're wondering where it went." There was something in his tone that made her turn her head slightly. Not sorrow exactly, something deeper. A tenderness edged with memory. "And what keeps you driving this late?" she asked. A small chuckle escaped him. "Habit, mostly. I retired 3 years ago, construction management. But sitting still never suited me. My wife used to say I'd pace grooves into the floor." He paused. "Used to." "I'm sorry," Amanda said, her voice instinctively gentler. He nodded once. 5 years now. The words didn't fall heavily between them, but they settled. Widow and widower, traveling through the sleeping heart of the city. "I lost my husband 8 years ago," she offered, and there it was, that fragile crossroads, where strangers either retreat behind politeness or take a careful step forward. Kenneth didn't retreat. "It changes the shape of everything, doesn't it?" he said. "Yes," she whispered, even the silence. They let that truth linger. The road curved, the skyline shifted in the distance like a memory rearranging itself. Amanda studied his profile in the passing light, the calm way he checked his mirrors, the patience in his posture. There was nothing showy about him, no strong cologne, no gleaming watch, just simplicity. And then she noticed the wedding band, still circling his finger. He caught her glance. "I keep it on," he said quietly, "not because I'm stuck, just because it reminds me I was lucky once." A small ache stirred in her chest. Not sharp, not painful. Recognition. That's a beautiful way to see it," she said. "What about you?" "I keep mine in a jewelry box," she admitted. "Some days I wear it, some days I don't. I'm still trying to understand what moving forward means, without feeling like I'm leaving him behind." Kenneth nodded slowly, thoughtfully. Maybe moving forward isn't about leaving. Maybe it's about carrying differently. His words surprised her, not because they were eloquent, but because they were honest. At 77, Amanda trusted sincerity the way she trusted real silver. You could feel its weight. They passed beneath an overpass, shadows swallowing the car for a brief moment. It felt as though they were suspended outside of time, two older souls exchanging truths that rarely surfaced in daylight conversations. "You know," Kenneth said after a pause, "most late-night rides are quiet in a different way. People staring at their phones, half asleep. It's rare to actually talk." "I suppose it is," Amanda replied. "It's easy to feel invisible at our age." He looked at her then, not a quick glance, but a deliberate one. "You're not invisible." The simplicity of it caught her off guard. Not flattery, not obligation, a statement. And in that instant, something subtle shifted inside her. Not a grand awakening, not foolish hope. Just the faintest reminder that she was still here. Still seen, still capable of being noticed in the quiet spaces of the world. Outside, the city lights continued to flicker past. But inside the car, something warmer had begun to glow. He hadn't complimented her appearance. He hadn't reached for easy flattery. He had simply acknowledged her existence. "You're not invisible." The words stayed with Amanda as the highway gave way to familiar neighborhood streets. Oaks lined the sidewalks, their branches curving overhead like watchful guardians. The rhythm of the city softened into the hush of residential calm. Her porch light glowed ahead, a small steady beacon. As Kenneth eased the car to a stop, An unexpected reluctance stirred inside her. The drive had lasted barely 35 minutes, and yet something within her felt awake. He stepped out once more, retrieving her suitcase with the same unhurried care. Amanda stood on the walkway, warm night air brushing strands of silver hair from her face. "Thank you," she said. For the safe ride, for the conversation, for something she couldn't quite name. He met her gaze. For a brief second, neither of them rushed to fill the quiet. Thank you, Amanda," he replied. It was refreshing. Refreshing. The word lingered, light but meaningful. She turned toward her front door, then paused. Something impulsive, rare for her, made her glance back. "Do you drive this route often?" "Most nights," he said. She nodded, as though storing that information carefully for some unnamed future. Inside, after locking the door and setting her suitcase down, she moved to the window. Through the lace curtain, she watched his taillights recede slowly down the street until they vanished. The house looked the same as it had that morning, orderly, composed, predictable. But it didn't feel the same. This wasn't romance. It wasn't fantasy spun from loneliness. It was something steadier. The realization that connection does not retire when we do. That even at 77, on a quiet Texas night, a stranger can remind you your story has not concluded. She went to bed later than usual. Kenneth's steady voice echoed faintly in her thoughts, and for the first time in a long while, the silence beside her didn't press so heavily against her ribs. She expected the feeling to fade by morning. That's how these things worked at her age. A vivid dream, a meaningful exchange, a spark of clarity. They glowed briefly, then dissolved into routine. She had learned not to chase flickers, but this one remained. The kitchen felt subtly altered when she entered it. Sunlight poured across the tile floor in long, golden ribbons, catching dust motes suspended in the air. She poured her coffee slowly, listening to the familiar drip of the machine, and still her thoughts wandered to the low hum of Kenneth's engine, the steady rhythm of tires against pavement, the grounded cadence of his voice. It wasn't that she was lonely. Her life functioned well. Church on Sundays, book club twice a month, weekly lunches with neighbors who had, over the years, softened into friendship. But solitude and loneliness were not twins. Solitude is chosen, loneliness arrives uninvited. Cradling her mug, she settled at the small breakfast table by the window. Outside, the crepe myrtle bloomed in soft pink against the blue morning sky. Thomas had always trimmed that tree himself. She could still picture him in his old straw hat, waving away her offer to help. It changes the shape of everything, doesn't it? Kenneth's words echoed again. Yes, it does. After Thomas passed, the geometry of her days shifted in ways both subtle and permanent. The left side of the bed remained smooth, untouched. The faint scent of his aftershave no longer lingered in the mornings. Grocery lists shortened, portions shrank. There were no longer playful debates in the coffee aisle. Grief hadn't shattered her life. It had reshaped it. And she had adapted. She had managed. Yet as she sat there in the warm spill of sunlight, she recognized something quietly unsettling. She had grown accustomed not only to solitude, but to being unseen within it. Kenneth's simple declaration had unsettled that acceptance. "You're not invisible." She traced the rim of her coffee mug thoughtfully. Why had that mattered so much? Because he had looked at her, not past her. Because he had listened, not politely, but attentively. Because for 35 minutes on a nearly empty highway, she had not felt like a relic of someone else's memory. She had felt present. The thought both comforted and unsettled her. At 77, one does not expect new chapters, one expects footnotes, gentle conclusions. And yet, something had shifted. Outside, a breeze stirred the crepe myrtle branches. Pink petals trembled, then held. Amanda took a slow sip of her coffee and allowed herself just for a moment to wonder what might happen if she didn't dismiss this feeling as a fleeting spark, What if it wasn't a flicker? What if it was a beginning? For years, Amanda had told herself that adjusting was the same thing as healing. She had adjusted beautifully. The bills were paid on time. The house remained orderly. The holidays were managed with grace. She had learned how to sit at a table meant for two and occupy only one side without flinching. But healing? Last night, in the soft darkness of that car, she'd recognized something more honest. She had grown used to the silence. She had not made peace with it. By mid-morning, she did something unusual. She opened the rideshare app again. It's harmless, she murmured to herself. Drivers rotate. He may not even be working. Still, her fingers typed in a simple destination, the pharmacy 2 miles away. An excuse? A test. The screen refreshed. Kenneth, active nearby. Her heart fluttered. At 77, your heart is supposed to behave sensibly, predictably. It is not supposed to skip like that. The reaction embarrassed her enough that she quickly closed the app. What are you doing, Amanda? She muttered. You're not a teenager. No, she wasn't. She wasn't being reckless. She wasn't spinning fantasies. She was curious. That afternoon, she attended her usual Thursday book club at Margaret's house. 8 women gathered in a circle of well-worn armchairs, tall glasses of iced tea sweating onto careful coasters. The novel under discussion centered on second chances late in life. Amanda couldn't ignore the irony. Do you believe in that? Margaret asked the group. Second chapters at our age. The responses were thoughtful but cautious. Companionship is nice. It depends on health. It can complicate family dynamics. When the question reached Amanda, she hesitated longer than usual. I think, she said slowly, choosing her words with care, that connection doesn't expire. We may be slower to trust, slower to leap. But the need to be understood, I don't believe that ever disappears. Margaret's eyes lingered on her. 15 years of friendship sharpened her perception. Something happened on your trip? She asked with a knowing smile. A faint warmth rose to Amanda's cheeks. Just a conversation, she replied, with someone unexpected. That evening, after dinner dishes were dried and put away, Amanda stood in her hallway longer than necessary. Framed photographs lined the wall like milestones. Thomas in his Navy uniform at 22. Their wedding day in 1970, lace veil, wide smiles. The two of them cradling their newborn son, looking impossibly young, impossibly certain. She touched the edge of the wedding photo. Loving again wouldn't erase this, she thought. It wouldn't dishonor it. But was that even what this was? She barely knew Kenneth. 35 minutes of shared road, shared memories, and yet something inside her wanted to know whether that connection had been simple coincidence or something more deliberate. At 8:47 p.m., Amanda did something bold for a woman who prided herself on caution. She requested a ride. This time the destination wasn't random. It was a small diner 15 minutes away, the one she and Thomas used to visit on Friday nights when neither of them felt like cooking. The kind of place where the coffee was strong and the waitresses remembered your pie preference. Her finger hovered over the confirm button for a full 10 seconds. Then she pressed it. Driver found. Kenneth. 7 minutes away. 7 minutes felt much longer. When the familiar dark sedan rolled to the curb, Amanda inhaled slowly before stepping outside. The air was cooler than the previous night. Crickets sang softly from the hedges, a steady summer chorus. The passenger window slid down. Amanda. His voice carried unmistakable surprise, and something warmer beneath it. Good evening, Kenneth, she replied, hoping her composure masked the faint tremor beneath her calm. He stepped out of the car again, but this time, the gesture felt different. Less obligation, more intention. And as Amanda approached the open door, she understood something with startling clarity. This wasn't about chasing youth. It wasn't about replacing what she had lost. It was about answering a quiet question that had begun whispering in her heart. What if your story isn't finished yet? He stepped out again, though this time she carried only a small purse. Well, he said with a soft chuckle, either I'm the luckiest driver in Dallas, or you're testing the algorithm. Amanda smiled as she approached the car. Perhaps a bit of both. He opened the door for her, and as she settled into the seat, the faint scent of cedar greeted her again, no longer unfamiliar, comforting almost. Out for another late adventure? He asked, easing the car away from the curb. I thought I'd get some pie, she replied. Didn't feel like sitting alone in my kitchen tonight. He nodded, as though that explanation required no further justification. That's a good enough reason. They drove in a quiet that felt different from the night before, less cautious, more aware, as if both of them understood this wasn't accidental anymore. I have to admit, Kenneth said carefully, eyes on the road. I wondered if I'd see you again. You did? She asked, genuinely startled. Some conversations stay with you, he said, especially the honest ones. She watched the streetlights drift past the window in slow rhythm. Maybe it's just the hour, she offered. Late nights make people reflective. Maybe, he conceded. But reflection doesn't create sincerity. It only reveals it. There it was again. That steady depth. Not polished, not performative. Simply true. When they pulled into the diner parking lot, Amanda felt a flicker of hesitation before reaching for the door handle. Would you... she began, then paused. At 77, pride becomes both shield and barrier. She had relied on it for years. Kenneth waited patiently. Would you care to join me? She finished. He blinked, clearly caught off guard. Are you sure? Yes, she said simply. I think pie tastes better with company. He studied her for a long moment, not suspicious, but thoughtful, measuring intention, respecting boundaries. Then he nodded. I'd like that. As they walked toward the glowing neon sign, Amanda felt something shift again inside her. Not reckless excitement, not girlish infatuation. Courage. The quiet courage of reopening a door that had remained closed for a long time. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee, sugar, and memory. They chose a booth near the window. Under the warm yellow lights, Kenneth seemed less like a stranger and more like someone misplaced from another chapter of her life. The waitress poured coffee and set down 2 slices of apple pie. Steam curled upward between them like a soft invitation. And Amanda understood something with startling clarity. This wasn't about replacing the past. It was about allowing the present, even now, even at 77. The diner was quieter than expected for a Friday night. A few late-shift workers lingered over coffee. 2 young couples laughed softly near the jukebox. Yet Kenneth and Amanda seemed wrapped in a pocket of calm, as though the world had respectfully stepped aside. Kenneth slid into the booth across from her, folding his coat neatly beside him. She noticed again the deliberateness of his movements. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. As if each action deserved attention, it made her feel seen, truly seen. At 77, most people offered polite acknowledgement before moving on, as though time itself had placed her in a category labeled finished, complete, background. But Kenneth looked at her as if she were still unfolding. They spoke of small things at first, the pie, the traffic, the absurdity of modern phone apps. Then gradually, the conversation deepened again, slipping beneath the surface without effort. He told her about the houses he had helped build over the years. Funny thing, he said, stirring his coffee slowly. You spend decades constructing spaces for other people's futures, and then one day your own house feels too quiet. She understood that more than she expected. I used to think grief was something you got through, she said softly. Like a tunnel. You enter in darkness and eventually step back into light. And now? He asked. Now I think it's more like learning to live with a new architecture. The rooms are the same, but the echoes change. He studied her words, not interrupting, respecting them. You're braver than you think, he said after a moment. Amanda almost laughed. Brave would have been staying home tonight. No, he replied gently. Brave is showing up. The statement settled into her chest, warm and unsettling all at once. Outside the diner window, headlights passed in streaks of white and red, life moving forward, as it always does. Inside, two older souls sat across from one another, not chasing youth, not denying history, but daring quietly to consider that connection might still be possible. And for the first time in years, Amanda didn't feel like a closed chapter. She felt like a page being turned, as if time itself had placed her beyond some invisible threshold. But not Kenneth. He didn't look through her. He looked at her. I didn't expect to see you again tonight, he said, softly, his gray eyes steady across the table. But I'm glad I do. Neither did I, Amanda admitted. And yet, here we are. Perhaps fate has a sense of humor. He chuckled, low and warm, the sound settling comfortably between them. Or maybe, she thought, it wasn't fate at all. Just two people choosing not to ignore a moment. The waitress arrived with their pie and coffee. Cinnamon and baked apples drifted upward in a fragrant cloud, and for an instant the past brushed against the present. Friday nights with Thomas. Shared forks. Familiar laughter. And now, this. She wondered briefly whether Thomas would understand the subtle thrill she felt sitting here. Not betrayal, not replacement, just aliveness. Do you mind if I ask something personal? Kenneth said, his tone measured. She appreciated that. The care, the permission. Go ahead. Do you often take late-night rides alone? A soft laugh escaped her. No, not often. Sometimes circumstances leave you little choice. She paused, glancing at him. And sometimes it's worth it. His eyebrow lifted slightly, playful but cautious. Worth it, huh? Do I make the ride worth it? She hesitated only long enough to ensure honesty. Yes, she said. You do. The words were simple, unadorned, real. Kenneth's expression shifted, surprise touched with quiet pleasure. And Amanda realized how rare it was, at any age, to speak plainly without fear of misinterpretation. They shared the pie slowly, not rushing. The sweetness was comforting, but it was the conversation that nourished something deeper. They spoke of family, not in vague summaries, but in specifics, in grandchildren's quirks, favorite novels reread in winter, the satisfaction of fixing a leaky faucet alone, the quiet pride in keeping traditions alive. He described his daughter's artwork, how she layered color the way he once layered brick and steel. Amanda spoke of sustaining friendships over decades, of learning which silences to respect and which to challenge. Each story carried the weight of years. Ordinary details made extraordinary simply because someone was listening. At one point, Kenneth leaned back slightly, hands resting near his coffee cup. You know, he said thoughtfully, sometimes I forget people like us are still capable of finding connection. We're told our best years are behind us. Amanda nodded slowly. I think that's wrong, he continued. Maybe the loudest years are behind us, but not the deepest. She felt that settle inside her. The best part of life isn't age-dependent, she said. It's about presence, awareness, willingness. His smile deepened, not flashy, not performative, intentional. Willingness, he repeated. Willingness to let someone in, even if it's just for a ride or a slice of pie. Warmth spread through her, not romantic in the cinematic sense, but intimate in the most respectful way. The warmth of recognition, of being understood without needing to explain every scar. They lingered over coffee long after the pie plates were cleared. Around them, the diner slowly transitioned toward closing, chairs stacked, counters wiped down, lights dimmed slightly. Yet their booth felt suspended in its own quiet sphere. The conversation drifted toward reflections on mortality, not morbid, but honest, on how time sharpens certain joys, on how sunsets seem richer when you've watched enough of them to know they are numbered. I don't usually do this, Kenneth admitted. Sit and talk for hours. Most people my age. We retreat into routine. It feels safer. Safer than what? Amanda asked gently. Safer than disappointment, he said. Safer than hoping for something that might not last. The words carried weight. And yet you're here, she observed. He held her gaze. Yes, I am. There it was again. That quiet courage. Amanda realized something profound in that moment. Connection at their age wasn't about chasing forever. It wasn't about rewriting history. It was about daring to remain open, about refusing to let caution harden into isolation. Outside, the neon sign flickered softly against the dark. Inside, two older hearts, weathered, wise, cautious, sat across from one another and chose deliberately not to retreat. And in that choice, something steady and meaningful began to take shape. Me too, Amanda said softly. It's rare, and it's precious when you find it. A quiet settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It felt complete. The diner's warm light caught the silver at Kenneth's temples, tracing the fine lines beside his eyes. At 77, she no longer saw those details as signs of decline. She saw them as evidence of endurance, of laughter, of grief survived. There is a particular beauty in a life fully lived. Kenneth carried that beauty without spectacle. When they stepped outside, the night air was cool, fragrant with rain that had darkened the asphalt. Streetlights shimmered against the damp pavement, scattering reflections like fallen stars beneath their feet. He opened the car door for her again. The ride back felt different from either journey before it. Quiet, not because there was nothing left to say, but because nothing needed saying. Comfort had replaced uncertainty. Something unspoken stretched gently between them like a bridge formed plank by plank. As they turned onto her street, Amanda felt the night narrowing. Would it be inappropriate, she asked carefully, if I wondered whether you might like to do this again sometime? Kenneth glanced at her. For a brief moment, his expression was unreadable, as if weighing not the question, but the courage behind it. Then a slow smile unfolded. Not inappropriate at all, he said. I'd like that very much. The car came to a stop in front of her house. The porch light glowed softly, as if it too understood this pause mattered. She realized she didn't want the night to end, not out of neediness, not from fear of being alone, but because what they had shared felt intentional, sincere, unexpected in the best way. Thank you, she said, her voice gentler than usual. For tonight, for everything. He held her gaze. Thank you, Amanda, for letting me share it. She stepped out, closed the door softly, and watched as his taillights faded into the darkness. A quiet exhilaration stirred in her chest, not the restless thrill of youth, but something deeper, richer. The realization that even now, at 77, her heart could still recognize connection, could still respond, could still open. Inside, she leaned against the closed door for a long moment. Life, she thought, it still offers surprises. Not the loud, dramatic kind that rearrange headlines. The quieter kind. The ones that gently reshape ordinary days. What had begun as a simple ride had become something else entirely. A reminder that connection is not bound by age. That sometimes it arrives when we least expect it. And, precisely when we most need it, the days that followed carried an unusual brightness. Not because the sun shone more brilliantly, though it seemed to. Not because the air smelled sweeter, though perhaps it did. But because she carried anticipation inside her. It wasn't flashy excitement, it was steadier than that, a slow warmth, a renewed awareness of possibility. At 77, new chapters are not expected, yet she felt one quietly turning. She didn't reach out to Kenneth immediately. Patience, she believed, was part of respect. Meaningful connections were not rushed, they were allowed to breathe. Instead, she let the memory of their conversation settle. The sound of his voice, the steadiness of his presence. Each recollection felt like a gentle tap at the door of her awareness, reminding her that life had not quietly concluded while she wasn't looking. A week passed. On the seventh evening, as twilight softened the edges of the sky, Amanda stood by her kitchen window, watching the crepe myrtle sway lightly in the breeze. The house was calm, familiar, but she was not quite the same. She picked up her phone, her reflection faint in the darkened glass. For a moment she hesitated, not from doubt, but from awe. Awe that after all these years of certainty, of managing, of adapting, she still had the capacity to begin. And with a small, steady breath, she opened the app once more. A week later, Amanda did something that would have once felt unthinkably bold. She sent a text. It wasn't long, it wasn't dramatic, it didn't sparkle with emojis or over-explain itself. Would you like to join me for coffee at the cafe by the park tomorrow morning? Simple, direct, honest. She set her phone down on the kitchen counter and half expected the old, familiar anxiety to creep in, the voice that warned against hoping too much. But when Kenneth's reply arrived, warm, succinct, unhurried, the calm thrill returned. I would like that very much. What time shall I meet you? The next morning the cafe was bathed in soft golden light. Early spring had brushed the park in pale color. Cherry blossoms loosened from their branches and drifted lazily onto the sidewalk like quiet applause. Amanda arrived early. She liked arriving early. It gave her time to observe, to settle, to feel. When Kenneth stepped through the cafe door, something in the atmosphere seemed to align. He spotted her quickly and lifted a hand in greeting. The simple gesture stirred an unexpected gratitude inside her for the ordinary magic of being recognized. Good morning, he said as he approached. His voice carried the same steady warmth. I hope you haven't been waiting long. Not at all, she replied. I enjoy being early. It gives me time to notice things. He smiled as he sat across from her. I've noticed that about you. The comment was small, unadorned, but it mattered. In a world that often rushes past subtlety, being noticed felt profound. They ordered coffee, black for him, cream for her. Sunlight caught the silver at his temples again, and she found herself appreciating the quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. No performance, no pretense. Their conversation unfolded naturally. Life, loss, gratitude, memory. Nothing sensational, nothing theatrical. Just truth offered gently. At one point, Kenneth tilted his head slightly and asked, Do you ever regret anything? Amanda considered the question carefully. Yes, she said at last, but not the grand things people expect. I regret the moments I didn't fully pay attention to, the words I left unsaid, because I assumed there would be time, the quiet opportunities I overlooked. She paused, wrapping her hands around her cup. But regret isn't meant to anchor us forever. It's meant to teach us, if we're willing to listen. Kenneth nodded slowly, something reflective settling in his expression. I know exactly what you mean. The conversation did not strain. It did not rush toward definition. It simply deepened, and Amanda realized she felt more alive than she had in years. Not because Kenneth was extraordinary, though his steadiness was rare, but because he reminded her that life's richness does not retire when hair grays or footsteps slow. Connection is not age-bound. Understanding does not expire. Gentle companionship remains timeless. After coffee, they wandered into the park. Cherry blossoms formed a delicate canopy above them. Petals drifted downward in soft spirals, collecting along the path like fragile confetti. They walked side by side, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent, both forms equally comfortable. I and Kenneth shared stories of the houses he'd built and the family dinners he missed most. He spoke of grief not as a wound, but as a reshaping. Amanda told him about Thomas, about ordinary moments that only later revealed their significance. Near a small pond, they paused. 2 ducks glided across the water, leaving gentle ripples behind them. I like moments like this, Kenneth said quietly. The kind that remind you you're part of something larger. Yes, Amanda replied, watching the water shimmer. They make you feel connected. But as she stood there beneath drifting petals, She understood something deeper. Connection wasn't only in the pond, or the blossoms, or the vast sky stretching above them. It was here, in the willingness to stand beside someone new, in the courage to speak honestly, in the decision, after years of careful solitude, to let another presence share the quiet. For so long, Amanda had believed her life was in its final chapter, well written, complete. Now she realized something far more beautiful. It wasn't the final chapter, it was a continuation. And as she glanced at Kenneth, walking calmly beside her, matching her pace without effort, she felt not the urgency of youth, but the steady unfolding of something earned. Not fate, not fantasy, choice, and that made all the difference. The warmth of Kenneth's words settled in my chest like a small ember that refused to fade. That's exactly it, I whispered to myself, almost as if confirming it aloud could make the feeling more real. And it was. This connection between us, fragile, tentative, yet undeniable, was unlike anything I had known in years. I thought I had grown accustomed to the rhythms of solitude, to the familiar ache of absence, to the measured routine of a life carefully managed. But now, standing beside him under the soft golden glow of the late afternoon sun, I realized that life had not finished offering surprises, that even at 77 there was space left for new understanding, new moments, and new joy. It wasn't about replacing what had been lost, not about trying to recreate or reanimate the past. I loved Thomas. I always would. Our memories were etched into the walls of my house, into the small routines I had meticulously kept for years. But this was not about filling empty spaces. It was something entirely different. This was about presence, the kind of presence that could only be earned, not demanded. About mutual respect and quiet acknowledgement, and about two people, each seasoned by their own trials and grief, finally recognizing in each other a kindred spirit. Two lives shaped by loss, resilience, and patience, now finding solace and joy simply in the company of another. It was profound in its simplicity, a kind of communion that didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It existed quietly, unassumingly, in the spaces between words and the pauses that weren't awkward but meaningful. We wandered a little further through the park, and I noticed how the sun was beginning its slow descent, bathing the world in an amber light that softened the edges of everything. Cherry blossoms, still lingering in the trees despite the late season, drifted like pink snowflakes, landing softly on the grass and the walkway. The petals, delicate and ephemeral, reminded me that beauty often comes quietly, unheralded, and that the most meaningful experiences are sometimes the ones that arrive with no fanfare at all. Kenneth glanced at me briefly, his gray eyes reflecting the warm light, and I saw a similar awareness in him, the recognition of something rare and quietly transformative. "Amanda," he said softly, his voice a low hum that blended with the gentle rustling of leaves. "Thank you for trusting me, for sharing your time, your thoughts, and your presence. It's rare to find someone willing to open themselves this way." His words, carefully chosen and unhurried, stirred something in me. My throat tightened and I felt a small, familiar flush rise to my cheeks. "And thank you, Kenneth," I replied, my voice trembling just slightly, "for reminding me that even now, life can surprise us in gentle, wonderful ways." We stood in silence for a few moments, not because we had nothing more to say, but because words were unnecessary. There was an understanding between us that needed no articulation, a subtle acknowledgement of the value of presence, of shared awareness, and of the trust we had both chosen to extend. The world around us seemed to blur, leaving only the soft hum of the evening and the faint sound of petals drifting to the ground. Each petal, I thought, was a reminder that beauty is fragile, fleeting, and yet infinitely resilient, just like connection, just like the human heart. Eventually, the moment nudged us gently forward, and we began walking back toward the street. Our steps were slow, deliberate, side by side, as if neither of us wanted to disrupt the rhythm we had found. Kenneth opened the car door for me, and I felt an unexpected surge of gratitude. not just for his thoughtfulness, but for the way he had allowed me to feel something new at this stage in my life. It was rare, almost miraculous. To think that, after all the decades of careful living, of measured days, of the predictability that comes with age, one could still feel this unexpected flutter, the thrill not of youth, but of discovery, not of romance, but of human intimacy in its most honest form. I slid into the seat, the cool leather familiar now, and he settled behind the wheel, his hands steady and purposeful. "Shall we make this a regular thing?" he asked, his voice gentle, carrying a quiet hope that wasn't expectant but inviting. I smiled, feeling the warmth spread across my chest. "Yes," I said. A simple affirmation, full of sincerity. I'd like that very much." He nodded, and for a moment we both sat quietly, savoring the shared understanding. When he drove away, I watched the taillights fade into the distance, the familiar streets passing under the tires like a moving memory, both constant and subtly changed. That night, as I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a long moment, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not merely for Kenneth, though he had been the catalyst for this awakening, but for the openness I had allowed myself to embrace, for the courage to let someone new into the rhythms of my life, for the quiet acknowledgement that even now, the heart could still awaken. That life, no matter how long or settled, still held capacity for surprise, for warmth, for the gentle unfolding of something that mattered. I moved to my kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window, watching the streetlights shimmer against the darkened pavement. The world felt familiar, and yet subtly different, as though it had shifted just slightly to make room for possibility. Over the next several days, I carried the memory of our time together with a sense of lightness. The house, which usually felt calm and ordered, now seemed imbued with an almost imperceptible sense of anticipation. The morning sunlight spilled across the floors in gentle arcs and even mundane routines. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of newspaper pages took on a richer texture. I noticed the way the shadows moved across the room in the afternoon, how the air smelled after rain, how the crepe myrtle outside my window seemed more alive than I had ever observed it. And each time I remembered Kenneth's presence, his steady gaze, the rhythm of his voice, I felt a quiet thrill that was not youthful excitement, but something deeper. The pleasure of genuine connection, of recognition, of trust earned and reciprocated. At 77, one does not often expect new chapters. One tends to think the book is largely written, that the arc of life has been completed. But I was learning gently and unassumingly that the narrative is never truly finished. That even now there are pages yet to be filled, new experiences yet to be lived, new understanding yet to be reached. And these discoveries do not arrive in grand, dramatic gestures. They come softly, in moments of quiet reflection, in shared laughter over coffee, in long walks under cherry blossom trees, in the gentle affirmation that one is seen, truly seen. A week later, I finally sent the text. Not a proclamation, not a demand, not an expectation, simply a question, carefully phrased, conveying interest and openness without pressure. "Would you like to join me for coffee at the cafe by the park tomorrow morning?" I pressed send and waited, trying to let go of anticipation and simply breathe. It was unlike anything I'd done in years. Bold, yes, but measured, considered, honest. And when Kenneth's reply came, succinct, warm, and deliberate, I felt the same gentle thrill that had accompanied me from that first unexpected ride. "I'd like that very much. What time shall I meet you?" The following morning, the cafe was bathed in the soft golden light of early spring. Cherry blossoms drifted lazily from the trees outside, all their petals scattering like delicate confetti over the cobblestones. I arrived early, savoring the quiet, letting the world settle around me before he appeared. And when he did, stepping through the door, glancing across the room, waving with that calm, steady smile, the ordinary magic of being noticed, of being truly seen, settled over me. He approached, voice soft and familiar. "Good morning. I hope you haven't been waiting long." "Not at all," I said. "I like arriving early. It gives me time to notice things." "I've noticed that about you already," he replied, settling across from me. The words were simple, unadorned, but they carried weight, and in that moment I realized again that connection does not retire when the years advance. It is timeless, quiet, patient, and profoundly alive. We drank coffee, black for him, a splash of cream for me, sunlight catching the edges of his silver hair. We spoke of life, of loss, of gratitude, of the small joys that endure. Every pause mattered. Every glance held meaning. At one point he asked me about regret, and I spoke honestly, not of mistakes, but of overlooked moments, words left unspoken, attentiveness denied. And he listened, not to respond, but to understand. And I realized how rare and profound that was at any age, to speak and to be heard. After coffee, we walked through the park. Cherry blossoms arched overhead, petals drifting like whispers. Side by side, we shared stories of love lost and found, of family, of ordinary moments rendered extraordinary by attention. We paused by a pond, watching ducks glide silently across the water. "I like these moments," he said. They make you feel connected to something larger." "Yes," I replied. And in that simple word, I acknowledged a truth I had begun to understand. Connection is not a fleeting thing. It does not retire. It persists. And even now, even after decades of carefully measured life, it can awaken anew. As the sun sank lower, bathing the world in honeyed light, Kenneth turned to me. "Amanda," he said, voice steady and warm, "thank you for trusting me, for sharing your time and thoughts. It's rare to find someone willing to open themselves this way." My throat tightened. "And thank you, Kenneth," I whispered, "for reminding me that life, even now, can surprise us in gentle, wonderful ways." We stood quietly, watching petals drift and listening to the stillness of evening. There was no hurry, no expectation, only awareness, presence, like something profoundly simple, deeply meaningful, and wholly ours. Walking back slowly, side by side, Kenneth opened the car door. I slid inside, feeling a surge of gratitude, not just for him, but for the courage to allow this gift into my life. "Shall we make this a regular thing?" he asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said softly but with certainty. "I'd like that very much." As he drove away, I watched familiar streets glide past, subtly transformed. Even at 77, the heart can awaken. It can connect. It can embrace life with curiosity, care, and quiet delight. That night, I went to bed with gratitude and a gentle excitement. The story was not about endings, it was about discovery, companionship, the enduring beauty of human connection. And in that quiet, my home no longer felt empty. It was full of possibilities, full of warmth, full of the promise that even now, the heart can surprise you.